So we're looking today at continuing in Science and the Gospel by Victor Fiddes with fidelity for his faithful work. I don't know where the name Fiddes comes from. I didn't look that up. But anyway, last time we went through chapters 1 through 4. So today we're looking at chapters 5 and onward. I posted 2 chapters, except my stick filled up, so you didn't get the end of chapter 6, but you did get chapter 5. So, Bill, you have a book. Does anybody else have a copy of this book, or were you working off of the posted material?
The Post.
The post.
I have the Post, just the Post.
Okay. Well, we'll make
That
post.
book is about $35, $40
Yeah,
on Amazon.
it's a good book.
Yes. Good book.
It is a good book. So,
Former pastor, right?
former pastor, that's right. He's a Canadian minister and wrote on issues of gospel and modern scientific context throughout his life. So TF asked him, he brings the most connection with how we speak to people in the life of the church. So that is one of the things that I think makes his work so nice and accessible. Bill's the one who suggested that we not just try and rush through the end of the book. We got through 4 chapters, but said let's do another session. So you can thank him for the encouragement to come back and engage this. Thank you, Bill.
Oh,
So the chapter on light and life hits on a major Torrantzian theme, and that is just the whole nature of light. Not merely as a metaphor, as he says in this book, that the nature of light as that which God creates goes beyond analogical thinking. It's actual scientific thinking, and out of the nature of reality, there is a correspondence with that in the nature of how we think about the gospel and what it is to see things in the light of that. In the light of that light, the word light shows up a lot in these sentences. So, Bill, were there any things you were particularly looking forward to as we go forward here? I want to make sure that we're attuned to reader interest on issues so that we make sure that we're hitting on points of particular interest.
well, nothing in particular. I think it's all good.
Okay.
I need more time to read it.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to your leading us through it.
Okay. We'll do that then.
I had a couple of questions, Marty, just
Let's hear it.
just trying to relate this to what I know of Scripture. Really fascinating idea that was new to me is gravitation represents a continual tendency of the universe to straighten itself out.
Yeah.
This is on page 45. This is a general relativity in a single sentence. This is general relativity. My brain went to Isaiah 40, I guess 45, 48, where it talks about the rough places made plain, the crooked straight. And I just wondered whether that was some sort of allusion to the idea of this straightness that the universe is fighting. Anyway, I had that question, probably
Good.
way out from left field. And then the other one was
the short answer on that is that the nature there are different kinds of arenas within which straightness is being put out there. There is a theological integration of them, though it may not be exactly what Isaiah was specifically pointing to. So the question of what is science, what is straightness, what is the straightness that Scripture points us to? So to say light travels in a straight line, that's kind of the movement of Einstein from time and space to moving to the constancy of the universe is the nature of light, and it has a straightness and the nature of how that interfaces with the rest of creation. is what creates the sense that is being talked about in this particular chapter on light. When we talk about, though, all of creation aligning with God's creative purposes, there is something about the nature of straightness that would say the physicality of a beam of light that goes is going that way because God intended it to go that way. So we don't have to write out God's intention in straight lines. The nature of light curving, for example, to create gravity is not outside of God's creative purposes. But to say that the nature of the things that God creates, they work according to God's purposes, and the nature of Isaiah's call for things to work according to God's purposes, that is the prophetic call. The prophet calls people back to be back in line with what it is that God is doing in their own particular way of being. So there isn't a sense of, you better walk the straight and narrow, as though it's a kind of a legalistic type thing. So the nature of straightness, we might say that the scientists are discovering is to say God has created the universe to work in a particular way, and even the things that are modified in what light does, those God works for his purposes as well. And that is always the call of the people who walk away from God, that there is a calling back to the light of God, which also does realign them with the nature of who God is. So there are ways I think we can say that there is a definite correlation there. That's a short little essay in response.
Well, that's good. The other was from Revelation, where Jesus is referred to as the root of David and the bright and morning star.
Yeah.
And which sort of refers to his being there at the beginning, the morning star. But maybe I'm building too much of a metaphor on that. But that's just the way my mind says. I try to grasp the meaning here.
The question that he raises is the Bible a science book? If you're asking about the nature of the Bible as a science book for the physical, astronomical nature of the universe, it may not be trying to answer that question, but it's aware of the universe and God's creating of that universe. And so it speaks about even the person of Christ within that which God has created in ways that draw on the nature of the universe, which the first book, The Circles of God, just talked about the whole history of science and the history of theology, being aware of the nature of the heavenly bodies, the orderly patterns in which they work, and circles of God, to say there is some sense in which God is at work in the firmament, in the stars. Jesus as the morning star is just to acknowledge, as you've said, that he is the rising star within all of creation. He is, and not star in terms of being on stage. It's not a Broadway star. It's to say the universe in its very foundation is grounded in this one who is light, who brings light, who is the morning star. So again, there's an interface. So the other thing is to say the Bible is a science book if the science we're trying to get to know is the living God. In other words, it represents to us reality in such a way that it allows us to observe, to learn, to discover the nature of reality so that we might live in the light of that reality. So in that sense, it is a science book. Yes, Bill.
I think he makes an interesting point on the bottom of page 47, where he speaks of light. If it's to be operative, it has to be transmuted. And since God in his pure being is ineffable, only an incarnation can serve the human need. Interesting, isn't it? Light is transmuted, and God, he's likening that to the, can I use the term transmute? Can we use the term transmuted in relation to incarnation?
Yeah. I mean, do you have a definition of transmuted there? It's not a word I use every day. So the trans means change of, there's a sense of transformation in transmuted.
Yes.
Alexa, what's the definition of transmuted?
Transmitted is a form of the verb transmit, which is usually defined as
She got transmit,
send
not
or forward,
transmute.
as to a recipient or destination, dispatch, convey. For more, I just need to give you more definitions for transmit.
Alexa doesn't always hear the way you want her to hear.
Yeah. Well, Fiddes says there at that bottom paragraph in 47, Einstein's telegram of 1929, quoted in the previous chapter, typifies this position. The scandal of particularity, however, does not appear so objectionable when we perceive that in his incarnation in Jesus Christ, God is doing the very thing which science says has to be done if light is to be operative. It has to be transmuted. And since God in his pure being is ineffable, only an incarnation can serve the human need. No man has seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father. He has declared him in this transmutation of the incarnation.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, the
Wow.
nature of light itself is that it's invisible, right? I mean, he makes that point here. Rick says transmuted is simply the change of one base thing to another thing. Thanks, Rick. So the nature of the transformation of one thing to another thing, and he says it's normally a scientific term, but we're recognizing here the nature of the divine taking on human form as a transmutation, the transformation of the form in such a way that it becomes visible and accessible. The nature of light itself is that it is invisible. You can't see light. T.F. Torrance makes much of that idea. But by light, we see things. When light hits things, we see things. So people often, if you ask them, can you see light? They'll either look up at the sun or the source of the light. But the point of just looking in front of you at your hand, you can't see the light that is making your hand visible. The light itself is invisible. And yet by it, we are able to see. And so the nature of Jesus makes it so that by seeing him, we see light, the very source of light, who is light in the world, the light who has come into the darkness. So he is both the source of light and he is the light that shines and allows us to be able to see that which can be seen.
The knowledge of the glory of God. He quotes that 2 Corinthians 4:6
right.
up. Oh, that's a wonderful scripture. One of my favorites.
Yeah. So the nature, I mean, some of these terms, we leave them so amorphous. The glory of God, people kind of look out and go, it's a glorious day, glory be to God, without really getting into the particularity of the revelation of God in Christ in speaking, revealing the love, the grace, the embrace, all of who God is to us, that glory takes on this transforming way of being, and the Spirit is, part of that whole, giving us the ability to apprehend the light that Jesus is, or as Bart would say, giving us ears to hear the voice of the shepherd, that we don't hear it by ourselves, that even our ears need to be given the capacity to hear the one who is the light of the world and to see what it is that he shows to us. But yeah, go ahead.
Eyes in our ears. Dwayne mentioned that once.
Yeah, that's right.
And that comes from some philosopher somewhere, I can't remember. Do you? The idea that we must have eyes in our ears.
Or was that Jim Houston? Go ahead, Dwayne. I see that hand up.
Yeah, I just like lower hand. When I was talking with Armando last week, we were reflecting on that section in Ephesians, to the praise of his glory, and he said he was translating a Spanish work into English, and he was asking, the Father would be like, what does this mean? And he was saying, glory, because doxa is just a generic word. It doesn't really mean anything to us, and that's the problem. So he's saying that on the one hand, it has the aspects of us enjoying God's glory, is that it's like us, when we're following a sports thing or whatever like that, where we're so invested in it that we actually respond as if we're part of the team and we won ourselves. And so we're so full of excitement and enthusiasm because of what God has done.
Yeah.
You know, and on the other hand, it also has to do with moving out of obscurity. Like God does this stuff faithfully all the time. His glory is that it should be lauded all over the world for everything that he's done for and through. You know, and then we see this one who is a central focus, the incarnations of Jesus. Like no one's really recognized truly, like, and this is what we try and do. No one's truly recognized the glory of what God has done in him becoming man. It's such an amazing thing.
It's probably outside of our ability to comprehend. The whole idea of the incomprehensibility does not mean that there isn't an apprehension. To apprehend that which is there doesn't mean you understand it all. But I think what is being pointed out here in some ways is the opening to the apprehending of the God made known in the person of Jesus. To think that you can fully comprehend is probably beyond human capacity. But the nature of what it is that we find with images of light and life, as this chapter is entitled, ask questions about our relationship to the universe as a whole. Which, you know, we live on a planet where there is night and day, and from that we measure weeks and years. If you get off this planet and talk about what light does, the light that was there in creation, what is stopping it? Or what would make it like our night and day?
Can you say that another way?
I
Ask that another
can try and say it. Light went out from the beginning of creation. It went out from the source, and it has gone out into the universe. And so we have light from stars that are, you know, billions of years away, that nothing has gotten in the way of the straight line that it takes. So it just goes. So to ask the question, from the light that went out on the first day of creation, is there a second day? Or is the original light still going?
I'm going to go with B.
So we're gonna suggest, yeah, we're once we get out of the context of our terrestrial context where we have night and day, the light of God, we're still living in the first day of the light of God's creation. The light that has gone out through the universe, and there is no night and day within the universe. It is all within the unity of God's going out of light that never ends. It shows, I mean, the illustration there is just to recognize we think within parameters and limitations because of our created context. But there are bigger contexts where light is has this constancy that he talks about, that Einstein saw. The constancy of the universe is not space and time, it is light. And that light goes out, and that is the first day still of God's light going out from the created work. And it re-centers around the nature of the creator's work, and not to see everything in the context as to how it corresponds to our experience on one planet in the universe that God takes care of and aligns everything else so that we survive and exist, which is later chapters, the whole sense of the particularity of the earth. But to recognize the constancy of light, the revision by Einstein of our thinking, so that we don't just think of space and time, which again, those are our experiences of space and time. And so to recognize how much of science often defaults to human experience. And when we theologically stand back, there are broader contexts that open more to the nature of reality. That is the theological invitation, to see all things from a God creator in the vision of light, as he's talking about here, perspective. So when I say on the handout, chapter 5, Light and Life, focuses on the universe as large. It's God-sized, but it's still all that which God has created. It is not God. The universe is not God. It's that which God created. God is even bigger than the universe that God creates, with whatever measure of big we might want to have, of such a different character that that God can stand and hold the universe and every element within it within his care, which is pretty big and mind-blowing. And I can't remember there are all these things people say, of the universe that we experience, when you stand out at night and look at the stars, even on a good night, the amount of the universe that we see, and I can't remember the percentage of the universe we see, but it's a very small number.
Mhm.
So anyway, just going back to the chapter then, the basic form of energy is light. E equals mc squared. He makes the point E is energy. So the basic form of energy is light. So to say, God creates a universe within which there is energy, and that energy provides the life. That's the second part, light and life. If there were not light, there would be no life. And so again, to see the provision of what it is that light does in the very light that comes, and Jesus as the light who comes into the world is also the one then who provides us life. The two should not be separated. There is a mutual sense of the givenness of what comes from them, which is for the benefit of the human. God gives us light and life, and they are related. The point that was made, the gravity of the situation is not a force, it is the straightening of the universe. To say that there is an orderliness, and this is Torrance's divine and contingent order, that the very nature of science itself is based on there being constancies of order, and light going in a straight line would be one of those things, and that the nature of the behavior of the universe is a correspondence with the nature of how it's created to be orderly. And so relativity is with the observer in space and time, not the universe. So Einstein's sense of relativity is a description based upon observers. Michael Polanyi's statement, all knowledge is personal knowledge. That is because if it's knowledge, it's a person who is observing, recording, and then somebody reads that which is recorded, all that, every step of the way, it is personal. So it is relative to the human in their observational capabilities. And to say Jesus comes as person so that we as persons can know God, that is God entering into the relativity of what he intends for us to have so that we will personally know who this God is as the God that created us. When I ask people, so what is the center of the observable universe? It's a trick question, of course. What is the center of the observable universe? Yeah, we are the center of the observable universe because we are the observer. That's right. And so then to ask, well, what is the center of the universe? Theologically, we would say, the God who creates the universe is the center. It all functions because of his being. So whether you have a point in space and time, if you're wanting a point in space and time that's the center, you're probably missing the nature of the universe. And to say that God is the center of the universe is a better scientific statement. The one who creates it and holds it together is the one who is its center. The universe of light, and these are all terms that are used of light and of God: invisible, unapproachable, timeless, and unmediated. To say that the words that T.F. Torrance loves to use, light is clearly his most enjoyed metaphor or analogy. In some ways, the language of analogy works even better than metaphor, especially if you talk about analogia relationis, the analogy of relation, that there is something in the created nature of the universe that stands prior to, and our analogies are a secondary reflection within it. So 2 Corinthians 4:6, for God who commanded the light to shine out of the darkness has shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. One of the things I get struck by constantly is how little we've done really in discovering the nature of the heart of God. I haven't seen really a theology book that has a chapter on the heart of God, and yet it's significant. And the nature of what our hearts mean. We use the language of I invited Jesus into my heart, and most children go, okay. They see a little house or something there, but it's quite a profound concept. On Sunday, there was a sermon on blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The image of heart, as it was in the sermon, which was a good sermon, but there were just a couple points I'm hoping to take up a conversation with, was that because of the nature of sin, we have a bad heart, and the metaphor of a mirror that's been broken, it can no longer reflect what's going on. So my problem is that's an individualized sense of the word heart, that I as an individual have my individual heart, and my mirror is broken, therefore I can't see either myself or God. But if we say the nature of heart is actually our relational way of being, so if we take Colossians 3:12, as God's holy and beloved people put on a heart of, so here's heart and a people putting a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another, forgiving one another. The one anotherness of all this says that heart is our way of relating to others. And so blessed are the pure in heart is a way of saying we relationally are to one another, and God is relationally to us in such a way that the purposes of God's live dynamically in that way of being, and we are transformed, the community is transformed, and the world sees something. So that's a move from the individual sense of the heart to the relational sense of the heart. And so has shined in our hearts. Now you get a sense of the heart of God opening up and seeing in us so that we also shine out the light of Christ in our life as well. It's a reflected glory, to use Tom Smale's language of his book, Reflected Glory. Paul, did you have a comment there?
You're muted.
You're mute. You're on mute there.
E. Cummings wrote a poem called "I Carry Your Heart with Me." I carry it in my heart, and I thought that was
Yeah.
that he put it to song. If you go on YouTube, you can find that song, put to music, and it's a beautiful song. It's a love song, but
Yes.
the idea of carrying my sweetheart's heart in my heart, I mean, that's what you're getting at.
Yes.
That's not an individualized heart, but it's enough to.
Well, it's breaking out of the paradigm, the metaphor.
Yes.
The nature of the Beatitudes is that they're attempting to transform us so that we live with a greater sense of orientation on the one with whom we are transformed. And so the idea then, the blessed are the pure in heart, who aren't just thinking about themselves, individualized heart, but are really opened up, they will see God, because all of the looking at self gets out of the way, so that we actually begin to see the nature of the God that creates us, loves us, and sustains us. And the image of E. Cummings there, carry your heart. He carries us in his heart, and we carry him in our heart by virtue of this seeing and knowing and hearing and responding that opens up something in us that is transformative. So that's a beautiful poem image. I will look that up for sure. Todd has a question or a comment. This may be off topic. In cosmology and astrophysics, light is sometimes thought to be the first moment's expression of our physical universe of time, space, matter, energy, taking off of the first instant of the Big Bang prior to matter as we know it existing. And I think that the equation after it must be how long ago that may have happened, the 14 point whatever billion years ago. So the nature of what cosmology and astrophysics are trying to do is they're trying to find language to describe something that is bigger than can be described by virtue of the physical manifestation of what's there. So this chapter is saying light has a relationship to time, and even Einstein would talk about the speed of light. And by virtue of the speed of light, if it's 5 light years, it's the distance, that space, the distance that light travels in 1 year, or whatever the number is that you're giving there. So to say that there is a relationship between time and space and energy as light, matter, there is a a sense of matter, I think, that is in that. We know that light has properties of wave and let's say the word wave and particles. Yep, there it is. So that is matter. So there is something that is there that is part of that. So I think that it is fair to say all of those work together, but they also are all at some level outside of our ability to capture all of it. We can experience at some level those dimensions in their particularity. But to say that for Einstein, the nature of light as energy is the constant in the universe, and all these other things are relative to the nature of light. So to say that they're four equal elements or something, and not that they each have a relationship to one another, which we may say is the theory of relativity. Todd, I don't know if we answered your question at all there.
Oh, I'm speaking beyond my ken, but more than once I've run into writing about the Big Bang by people who are specialists, cosmologists and astrophysicists talking about it. And I just was mentioning, and I don't know if this is quite on our topic, but I was just mentioning that I've run into experts talking about the first moment of the Big Bang being an expression of light. And 10 to the minus 43 seconds from point zero of the Big Bang and zero time, zero space, zero matter, zero energy to 10 to the minus 43 seconds into the universe. So a very minuscule speck of time.
Yes.
It's talked of light being the first expression, and stuff is so small and either uncreated or so compacted that it is outside of any of our figuring out the chemistry of any matter or whatever in that small speck of time at the very start of the Big Bang. But at that moment, it has been talked of as an expression of light at the very start of the Big Bang.
Yeah. Yeah, and the question of light, I mean, if it's the creation, is there space and time within which light is born here is a question. I mean, was there a darkness where there was space, or does all of it come into being? I mean, the biblical account would say God creates out of nothing, and therefore it was not only light, but space and time that were also at their point of origin. And how we measure all that, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and that just what you just said is consistent with relativity theory, that space is actually created too. There was a time of zero space.
Yes.
Actually, it's not correct to say there was a time because there was.
We can't do that either.
There was a non-time, non-space, non-energy, non-energy thing that was not a thing before.
The time of nothing. Yeah. Paul Bart's use of the word nothing, the nihil, is that which God has not created. And so it is to say there was nothing yet created in the time of the nihil. And then all came into being, time, space, light, and all those things. So yeah, I think that's true. And again, he makes a point later in the chapter, in the book, saying that description is not the same thing as explaining. And so to say we may be able to describe the nature of properties of light and space and time and movement and all that, that doesn't mean we're explaining anything about why it came into being, where it's going, how everything interfaces with one another. Description is at some level the best we can do. And if you ask a doctor, so you can describe all that goes on here, and you can tell me if you cut here and put something in here that it'll keep you alive. But how did this all get to be this way? How did this human body become like this? It's like that's outside of my capacity to be able to explain. So I think that it's appropriate to recognize that part of the very nature of the book, Science and the Gospel, is to say the nature of science is a descriptive exercise in recognizing the nature of the universe so that we can live in the light of that which is known to us, but it can't explain where it came from. it can in some ways explain how we abuse. And if you grow plants, you can say if you put on fertilizer and water it, it's probably going to grow better. That's kind of explanatory, but it's at a pretty low level of description of what we can do to help certain things to grow. When you get to the question of the nature of human beings, a lot of the things that have been proposed to help humans to grow have actually been quite destructive. And so there is the question of the gospel brings a way of being that releases people from the human instincts that end up being destructive, to find the light of God, to open us to what it means to flourish and to thrive in the light of the way God created us to be, loving God, loving neighbor, loving self. So even there is a meaningfulness to the nature of the gospel that goes beyond what it is that the human intellect out of its own resources might be able to come up with. And both Karl Barth and T.F. Torrance they spend a fair amount of time on that. And again, the very nature of the article I wrote on T.F. Torrance and personalism, that was the essence of it, is that personalism always builds from some person's observations of what they think it is persons, and then building a whole system on that, which ends up basically feeding human agendas. It's better than impersonal, but it's still not a reconciled to God way of being as persons, which is the ultimate of what it is that brings life and light to us. So again, chapter 5, the scandal of particularity, the nature of science dealing with the particular, which again, Harry Magruder talks, just about the nature of science historically generalizing, and that Jesus is so difficult because you have to treat him on his own terms because he's not just another human. And so to say that the nature of Jesus as the light that comes into the world, he comes into the world that in a way that no other human could, because no other human could reveal God in the way the light of Christ can reveal the nature of God and what it means to be human, which I'm working on that section right now in my Karl Barth Volume 3 book on the particularity of Jesus and revealing to us even what it means to be human. So,
Could I make a comment,
please,
question, or
please,
uh,
yeah, just jump in whenever you're.
a fascinating statement Bill, I think already referred to, was the idea that the universe appears to have been made for man and not man for the universe. I was just a teenager in my mid-teens, and I got introduced to amateur radio. I don't know if y'all know what that.
I know what it is. I haven't done it, but I know
was.
what it is. Yeah.
But the most wonderful thing was my discovery of the ionosphere, where particular frequencies or waves of energy that act like light, really reflect off the ionosphere, and you can talk to somebody using radio frequency waves if you're at the right wavelength, who's on the other side of the earth, because it skips off the ionosphere. In fact, you can be speaking to someone on the other side of the earth, or nearly on the other side of the earth, both ways, so that when you hear him or he hears a kind of echo. But I thought to myself, all these millennia that this, and the ionosphere, serves other purposes, of course,
Yeah.
but it's a protective feature, among other things. But the idea that it would facilitate communication just struck me as remarkable. That men had no idea that was there.
Yeah.
And so useful.
Yeah.
So anyway, that struck a nerve when I read that. So
Yeah.
Remember
The discovery of what is there. I mean, that's just such a great phrase to say. Science just keeps discovering what's there, and there was a time where we didn't recognize the nature of light and oxygen and all these things that now we know it's there, but we kind of take it all for granted. And
Yeah.
the ionosphere, again, we take it all for granted. It protects the earth, and we are nourished and sustained by all kinds of things that we're not even aware of. And if you don't have suntan lotion, the very sun that warms the earth can also burn you. So you have to learn to respect the nature of all of that. The water that is in the air. If you live in a place with a lot of humidity, you're more aware of the water in the air. But there's just so much that we don't know. I'm working on a sermon right now for Jim Houston on. He wants sermons on participation, theology of participation, and so to say, I'm writing a sermon on explaining the Trinity to children.
Hmm.
And so to
Mhm.
just to be able to talk about the nature of all that is there, we're not aware the air is there. You can't tell except that you breathe it, and you can't tell the light is there. And then to say, now you can see the persons that are sitting there, you can see their faces, and you could hear them. But what about your grandparents or your parents who you can't see them right now? Are they still there? If you think right now, do they love me even though I can't see them right now? And to be able to say, well, yes, they do. It's like, well, that is another field that we have only begun to become aware of, the dimension of the field of the personal, and that the nature of the personal is that persons can speak, and the person of Jesus, who isn't right here physically to be seen, but he has spoken and he is still speaking, and we pass on what it is that he has said and is saying and will be saying. And Jesus says, "You're not alone. I'll be with you always." That's the promise that he made, and so he doesn't have a physical presence, but he does have a personal presence. And so to introduce the idea of personal presence, and Jesus reveals also the personal presence of his Father, who sent him, who he can't be without that Father. And he also sent the Spirit, who you can't see the Spirit because the Spirit doesn't have the same kind of physical presence. But the Spirit's the one that when you hear your parents say that you are loved, something in you warms to the idea of being loved. And when you hear Jesus say he loves you, you also have a sense of curiosity. Why does he love me? He just loves you because of who he is. And to begin to just see the nature of the personal presence of Jesus as being as real and present as air and light and all these other things that we can't particularly see, and yet in them we move and breathe and have our very existence. And so, what Jesus reveals to us is the nature of the God that holds it together and gives us all these invisible things that sustain us in life, except Jesus keeps on speaking, and air never will, and the light that warms the ground doesn't, but he helps us to understand even those as his work. So anyway, the whole nature of integrating science and theology, that's kind of part of what I think this book is also attempting to do, is to really bring a sense of things like the ionosphere, that we had to discover all these, and Polanyi's term of heuristic, and Torrance used it too. If we're going to really discover, we need to become like children, and we need to keep saying, how does that work? What's that about? You know, the curiosity is half of the battle. And
Well,
therefore, to just believe that there is air there, it doesn't make the air come or go, but it does allow us to ask better questions about how to maintain the quality of the air and to live in the light of the air and to make sure we don't pollute the air and all of the stewardship of the air. Anyway,
right.
the sense I think that is being opened up here that you're pointing to is that science serves reality when it's done well. And that reality can be living in the created universe, but it does even better when it serves the God that creates the universe and sustains it.
Yeah.
And there's the gospel.
Well, the wind is one of those things that that's what I think the word for spirit comes from.
Yeah, pneuma.
It
Yep.
was used to describe the wind, and that's something that you don't see but you feel, and it's coming from somewhere and going somewhere else. and who knows which way it goes.
Yes. The spirit blows where he will. And
Yeah.
we see the impact of it without seeing the wind itself. No, that's another one. I need to add that in as well.
But you know,
Yeah.
I going back since I was a lawyer and as a career, I didn't do much hands-on stuff. So I've got to go all the way back to my ham radio hobby as a teenager.
Right.
But you talked about you mentioned about children. I remember I had a project I wanted to do, and I was in a radio club with grown-ups, men mainly. There were a couple of women, and these men were mostly U.S. war veterans, World War II veterans. I grew up in the 50s, and so the war, and so that's how they knew radio and that sort of thing. Many of them did. And at one point, there was a project I wanted to do with some equipment, and they said it wouldn't work. I couldn't do it, and I did it anyway. I just figured it out, and it told me something about when you get in there and work on a problem yourself and have an idea, you can, maybe that's Polanyi too, but but that's why I wonder, that's why Jesus says you've got to be like a little child.
Yeah.
You can't have all these presuppositions about how life really is and so forth.
Yeah. And all those suppositions, those are the things that humans teach us as the nature of reality without having a perspective that really allows the full sense of the reality to be there. Polanyi's word indwelling, to actually indwell being a ham radio operator. You get in there, you learn how it works, and you learn what it looks like to connect to other people who are also sitting with their transmitters. And there's a whole learning process that requires a childlike curiosity. You know, how does this work, and who's out there I can talk to? And that doesn't have all of the blocks of, I could never do that, or I don't think that works, or it's not meaningful to me, or there's all kinds of things that become mind pollution that keep us from curiosity, right?
Yes.
So the nature, the best sense of the nature of the gospel is it gives us a scientific mind like a child that keeps wondering. And Einstein himself said, all knowledge proceeds with wonder, right? And that's another way of talking about the mind of a child in the exploratory process.
Mm-hmm.
And my hope is that that the church will wake up to not just giving people statements of truth about God, but will invite people into the discovery process that opens up when you discover the Creator and his intention for the knowing and loving and being loved and caring for one another in the world, that are all openings that keep expanding from that, that are part of the delight of what it means to know the one that makes it all. So thank you for those insights. I have one of my professors is a ham radio operator, and he talks to people all over the world. But so I know it's another image of connection, right?
Yes, but
And the mediums.
Sad thing is that these are making ham radio a fairly obsolete hobby.
They're
anymore.
making it obsolete for general use, but there's still something that ham operators enjoy, the network of what it is that's available through that. And so anyway, it's all good. There's probably more metaphors on modes that pass.
And who knew that the moon was put up there to provide us with a base to go to Mars?
Who knew? Moving on to chapter 6, evolution. Let's see. You had most of this chapter. So the whole nature of what it is we mean by general evolution versus microevolution, the sense that there is change, there is development and growth within species, that would be microevolution. that change within space and time, but the question about did it all come into being by virtue of mere chance and the survival of the fittest, these principles that have been held out are what are called into question. That there's simply a development that happens by virtue of chance that he recognizes. It's never explained how those things came into being in the first place, especially when you get into more complex things. And so science, in a sense, has a blind faith as to why the nature of what is there, which Don Lennox says the nature of DNA is an information system. And the whole sense of DNA, mutation, genetic change, it all requires that the original information system be there. And if you only look at the mutation within the information system, you're not answering the question, well, where did the information system come from? And information is a highly organized, which is we know with genetic codes and all that, what creates a human being is a pretty complicated blueprint, is the language that he uses in this chapter. So he's basically arguing, though there are things that we can see that Darwin did point out about the nature of change and development within complex systems, it gives no answers to the fundamental foundation of the information systems, the sense of what it is that you mentioned, Paul, about the nature of how the universe appears to be made for humans, the anthropic principle, as that's called. And to say that the nature of natural selection, that the strongest wins, it just means there's more of them. They're stronger. It doesn't mean they're smarter or anything like that. Volcanoes really don't care who they're killing. And the nature of earthquakes is they can kill people too, whether they're smart or not. So to simply reduce everything to survival of the fittest is problematic because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get particularly the complexity of the human body.
Yeah.
And again, if you take I've often thought I need to figure out how to do this in a room and say, if we take the age of the universe at 14 or 13.8 billion years, you didn't start to have the formation of something that would even begin to be a set structure that could be planet like ours 4 billion years ago. So you have to walk maybe a third of the way across the room and say, this length here is the amount of time that there was even solid structure of our Earth to be formed. And then within that, I think that the first life appeared on Earth something like 350 million years ago. Todd, you can probably tell me the answer on these things.
No, about 3.85 billion is thought to be
3.85
about
billion.
the first bacteria,
First
approximately.
Bacteria. Okay. So again, you've got the whole width of the room is the whole size. The amount of time where bacteria comes in is going to be something like a third. And then to have complex creatures, Todd, where you have something beyond just an individual cell, where would you get complex? I think it's quite a while before complex would show up. What would that be?
Well, it's right around the Cambrian explosion at about 535 million years ago by our standard thinking.
That's again, that's a fraction of the amount that was there when we took the amount of time of there being the first single cell. Within that, to get to the point where there's something that would be even an early mammalian type anything, that's going to be another further division. Again, if you're standing in the room, you just keep saying the distance between, the big picture and the part. When you get to the advent of the human, basically, you don't move. The amount of time between when a humanoid form within that hole. You just stay at the wall. So to talk about the complexity of all that makes up what it means to be humans within the universe, within even the world that we know it, to have something as complex as aware of self and aware of the world, all these things really developing in such a small time into its highest complexity it borders on the miracle, which is to say, it appears intentionally designed by the God who intended to make us. So anyway, that's the short of what all that's supposed to say.
There was a book that came out 20 some odd years ago, written by Tom Wolfe,
Okay.
called The Kingdom of Speech. Do you know anyone familiar with that book?
I'm
He
not.
takes on that question in the context of speech, the development of speech,
Uh-huh.
and Darwin. That it's a very interesting treatment by a non-scientist who was brilliant, Tom Wolfe.
Very good. Well, there are people who are doing interesting work out there. And evolution, again, to say there is a belief system. The question, do you believe in evolution or not, is a question, does it have the most profound explanatory ability to it? And I think the point that he has in the book is that there's nothing that is really explanatory about how the basics of it actually work. You can't get the meaning of it. You can observe some things, but even those observations are profoundly limiting, and we can't confuse how a thing works with what it is. I mean, that was one of his lines in the book. So what it is a very complex world of living things that interact and interface with one another, and the nature of how all that works is not explained. And so he uses the word for the belief that one has in all of that being the answer, evolutionism. The ism always adds a sense of a belief system that says everything is material and nothing more, and simply tries to argue from all of that. So it excludes the nature of the personal within all of that. So he proposes that Darwin had a theory that was in search of evidence that was yet to come, and it's never come.
I like the quote from Karl Barth, the letter to
Yes.
he's explaining what I think you just mentioned, that much of the difficulty has arisen over evolution has resulted from the mistake of confusing how a thing works with what it is.
Yes.
And Barth and Fiddes uses the letter from Barth to his niece.
Yes.
Telling her not to confuse an organ with a vacuum cleaner. He's saying, or don't compare. Has one explained to you in your seminar that one can as little compare the biblical creation story and the scientific theory like that of evolution as one can compare, say, an organ and a vacuum cleaner? There can be as little question of harmony between them as of contradiction. Theory of evolution, just to abbreviate it, is an attempt to explain the same reality in its inner nexus naturally in the form of a scientific hypothesis. Even Darwin said, I say what I say and leave it to theologians to reconcile scriptures with them. That's their province, not mine.
Well, there's a certain perversity when, no, that's not what I'm studying. I am studying. And, I don't have time for this speculative stuff. There's a perversity about that.
It has certain assumptions that it doesn't want to deal with.
No, and people call themselves intellectuals or scientists or whatever, and it's just perverse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, humility is the best part of science. When somebody says, I know this much, I don't know those things. And so I will leave room for them. I certainly won't discredit them, which that's been part of the problem of evolutionary or evolutionism thinkers, is that they discredit any other view other than their own. And that becomes not helpful and creates, division and chaos, and usually feeds certain human agendas where the human wants to run the world and not have to submit to one who is greater than them, which is a theological problem right there. But yeah, it's we want science to serve, and it began serving God and humanity, but it kind of took over and thought itself worthy of becoming the new priests of truth. And so at that point, it lays something aside that is too profound and ends up arguing just with material things without maintaining any sense of the meaning of it all. So, yeah, problematic. So the question is, spontaneous life on Earth for nothing possible? And he's basically going to say, no. It's, the idea that it just comes in without, we certainly have never seen anything. I mean, which the coming of life, the development of genes and all that, the development of complex systems, the development of consciousness, all of these, if you go and study, it's, does science have an answer for these, major leaps in the development of the world? They have no explanations for any of these major leaps within the whole system. They can only say it must have happened because now we have living, organic, self-conscious beings, but we can't explain how it came into being. So that's ironically what you would call a belief without evidence, which is what people generally accuse Christians of having. Where I would say Christians have belief with evidence given in the person of Jesus Christ, the witness of the church, the nature of what it means to live in accordance with who God is, that brings about a life that is life-giving and appears to be the fulfillment of what it means to be humans, and that it gives space for love and meaning and connection, all those things that seem to be the very purpose of what human life is about. So to say theology still has a better foundation for understanding the meaning, purpose, and actuality of all it is, I think is a fair kind of statement. Moving on to chapter 7, Man and Time, the problem of time, the whole sense of contingent events, which Carey Magruder makes much of, that modern science has moved away from the cause and effect of Newton. And in an Einsteinian world, there are contingent events that we have to study, specific, particular, here's where the particularity comes again, particular events that form the nature of what is. And so we have to live within a dynamic, flexible space-time continuum and ask how things came to be the way that they are. And the nature of science in many ways is a history engagement. If you're going to do geology or astronomy, you're studying the history of the development of things and the contingent moments where these things came to be what they are, the nature of the human being, the nature of families, all of these things. There are contingent ways that things come to be what they are, and they can't all just be taken under generalities and really give the kind of meaning that people like Einstein would say would need to be there. With Einstein's statement, the distinction of past, present, and future is a stubborn illusion, right? It's the human thinking about those things, right? It's the human at some level defining everything by virtue of their existence with past, present, and future, and not from the nature of the God who is from eternity, for eternity, and through eternity, and what it looks like to live within those. So it is an illusion, but it's a very real illusion, and our clocks tell us what time it is. So we are superimposing on the structure of the universe and our space within it time. So it's a useful illusion that helps us to operate together, but it is our reading onto something that, in a sense, is not there in the way that we would claim reality. I think it was Polanyi said, "Your thoughts are more real than that rock." And he's trying to, in a sense, establish the nature. The rock has a kind of being that we want to say the rock is real and my thoughts are not, but the nature of what it means to be humans who use the word real to mean real, as in things that we own and embrace, as in real estate, reality are the things that are true to the nature of the universe as made. And so to recognize that we are having a thought has a reality that gets quickly dismissed by the materialists who don't want to deal with the nature of what it means to be created beings who think and love and all those other things. So to reaffirm that the personal is just as real as the material, and maybe more, because God made it that way, and God is more real even than that which God makes. Let's see. He talks about the distinction between Chronos and Kairos. You probably all know the distinction between Chronos and Kairos. One is measured time, that's humanly measured time. Chronos is measured time. Kairos is in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son. That's meaningful time. And so to say, the nature of scripture is it's not just attempting to measure time as humans measure, but to see the nature of the purposes of God in the contingent history of humanity, and Jesus stepping into our space-time continuum as God in the flesh is part of the contingent nature of all that follows in what we call Christianity, at least in its best forms. There's all kinds of things that kind of mess that up. But belief that God is God and we are not. So in Jesus, eternity has entered into history. So the nature of eternity is it's not limited by our time. God is not limited by our time. God makes our time as a limited time to live within. And Jesus steps into that to give meaning to time. That is the nature of the gospel, the God who comes into our time to give us a view of history that is not merely events that have happened in the past, which John McMurray distinguishes between event and act. When a tree falls in the forest, that's an event. There's no motive in it, but an act has a motive. Every act has a motive. A person is motivated to do something. And if you have a 3x4 in your shoulder and turn and knock somebody in the head, you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that." You're saying the act there was actually just an event. I didn't see you there. I didn't intend to hit you. And so as a therapist, I often say, every act that somebody does has a motive. Every act has a motive. It is not just an event. And so when people say, I say, "What are you thinking?" "I don't know," or "I'm not, nothing." Well, you're acting there saying nothing, but there's something happening inside of you. You're unwilling to reveal your motive while you're remaining silent, but there is a motive there. So to pursue the nature of motive is at some level to enter into the world of meaning. And so the nature of the gospel is it engages humans as meaningful beings. We don't just live events. We live within the act of God, and we act in meaningful ways. Even the things that we do that are wrong, there are motives to be explored as to why we did those things. They reveal the nature of that which we would say calls for repentance, the change of mind. I just thought I needed to hide because I'd get in trouble. Oh, so your motive was fear, and you thought somebody would disapprove, and it wouldn't turn out well for you. Got it? What are we going to do with that? You're living your life in fear. What does the gospel do? Perfect love casts out fear. What does it mean to not be driven by fear of those around you, what they're going to think or do to you? Anyway, those are all just ways of this entering into time and space and motive, and not just seeing the history of it as a series of events, but as the act of God and active humans who live in correspondence with one another through meaningful activities. Anything else in chapter 7 anybody wanted to? I know you only have, with the exception of Bill, you only have the outline, so I don't know how far you read, Bill, but
very tangentially related on Kairos. I've been trying out the phrase on people. I'm not sure if it's really sticking or effective, but I've been saying, how we've all heard Jesus is the reason for the season of Christmas. Yes. I've been telling people, you are the reason for the season of the universe. You are the reason for the season of time. that before time you were found in Christ,
Yes.
before there was time, in love, in his sonship, in his papa.
Yeah, no, that's good. And how would people respond?
They're kind of scratching their head, and I'm kind of thinking maybe I need to give them some homework first. I mean, maybe they need to go see Back to the Future first to kind of get revved up in that way of thinking.
Maybe so. Good. No, I think that's a great thought. Thank you for that. On to the uniqueness of man, then, which deals with the unique relationship between nature and humans. So, you could say the humans, the fact that we're engaged in nature, that what Torrance also calls the personal coefficients of knowledge, humans are involved in knowing the world. So, to say the nature of science and all knowing, it is all the work of humans, which is why the book that I'm writing on the science of the personal begins saying, we're only given a half truth, and that is the scientific truth about the world as object. But the world is not merely object. There is a dimension to every one of us that is person, right? And so if we deny the personal sense and only see each other as objects, we're only getting a half truth. To see who we are as persons is also within the purview of what science should do, to study all of reality. Because if you're only giving people a part, then the question, who is that little man behind the curtain, comes into play. And so the denial of the dimension of the personal means that we have allowed ourselves to be inattentive to what it means to care for humans as persons and to care for them. And today, even the question of, what is mental health and who gets to define it? And if we were just to begin with, a simple kind of definition from John McMurray, that the nature of fear comes from the amygdala, which is the oldest part of our brain, and it's basically a self-protective component of our physical being. But it means that we're always going to be wary and worried about getting injured and harmed. And there's an appropriate place to do that. Like when you're driving down the road, it's good to be afraid of going over the line. But if your whole life is living in fear of what might happen if you do anything, you'll become profoundly self-focused, self-protective. You won't let anybody see you or know you or let you in, and you'll become isolated and die. The ultimate end of fear is that it makes you ultimately concerned about self and not really concerned, particularly in love, for anyone else. You always will see them as a threat. So to say, how many people in the world right now are living with high levels of fear? And I'd say it's a pretty high percentage. And so if we say mental health would require that people have a sense of security, other-centered concern and care for others. There's a lot of people who live with constant anxiety. And some of it's about finances, some of it's about the neighbor, some of it's about the world and wars that are going on. Some of it's the people who are knocking on our nation's doors to get in, but there's anxiety all around us. So to say we've never had such access to anxiety creating events in the world or actions in the world as we have now. And so most people are dealing with some level of mental health issues, but we haven't kind of identified it. We just have limited it to a very few. And my whole point in that is to say the nature of us being very focused on truth being about the objective world means we're blind to where most of us really need health. And yet science has kind of said we can't look at it. And often people say, but psychology does that. And it's like psychology assumes that you are an individual with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It doesn't deal with relationships. The diagnostic manual, DSM-5, nothing on relationships. They're all observable, generalizable disorders of the individual, which means we're blind to the relational breakdowns, and everything's been generalized to the point that we can't deal with the particular in a way appropriate to the nature of persons. Therefore, the nature of the gospel, as where I think this book is going, is that the gospel takes seriously who we are as persons, deals with the particularities of our situations, calls out in us what it means to lovingly be engaged in our relationship to the world and one another, and to recognize we need to be fully human in knowing the world and other people. And only in that can there be something that brings a sense of security, of cooperation, of living and loving together that might come as a result of all that. You're getting some Marty sermons here.
Preach on.
So the whole thing of the anthropic principle, again, is to say the universe seems to exist to make a way for humans as persons, I would put in there, not just merely biologically, but the dimension of what it means to be personal within that, and to have purpose within that, and ask, what is the purpose of all of the processes of the world that serve humanity? And at some level, he says that we have to choose between the kingdom of God or peering into the shadows, trying to figure out from a non-speaking world how it is that we ended up the way we are and the meaningfulness and purposefulness of what it is we have. And he makes the whole point about DNA as the blueprints. And does that not suggest that we came from a meaningful origins and not just meaningless chance? DNA does not make sense as the result of meaningless chance. So the evidence, he says, that the universe is ordered, which is very much T.F. Torrance, the divine contingent order. What might that mean? And Torrance is going to say all science has to build on that. The universe is ordered. How do we get meaning out of that? And that's where theology needs to step up and say, we have things to say in that conversation as well. Chapter 9, the transcendent self, the human relation to reality. Humans have been made for the physical universe. Our self-awareness is a unique feature and awareness of the world that is other than ourself, the objective reality. So the nature of self-awareness, to know the self, to think, to feel, which even animals have some capability in that, but there is something in the human that goes beyond the animal, where more than nature, we transcend I'm not sure what that word's supposed to be, physical and mechanical laws, the rules, maybe, the rules of physical and mechanical laws. We are more than that. We have personal engagement that goes beyond the order of biology, time, and relation to the universe. The human mind is independent, but not unrelated to nature's reality. So to say the nature of Father, Son, Spirit is their interrelatedness, and we are created in God's image. Karl Barth's going to say, a male alone or a female alone is not the image of God. Only male and female made for one another can be the image of God. The interdependence that God creates, and to say, as scientists, the world and all of the systems that function within it, as well as within the human body, all show the orderliness of an interrelated world that is part of human reality, and the wonder and awe of not being able to figure it out, but to recognize that wonder and awe with the heart of a child is a very appropriate thing to say, wow, bigger than me. This is all bigger than me. And the transcendent self is that we are not made for our isolated individual self. We are made to relate to the world, which again, Michael Polanyi's phrase, contact with reality, which Esther Meeks has written a book based on Polanyi's book, Contact with Reality, that the nature of science is contact with reality. And again, in her work, she's going to further Polanyi's work. Reality includes personal reality, not merely reality. It's not merely defining reality as the objective physical world. Chapter 10, faith realizing light. The word realizing there, that is the opening up to what is there. So the uniqueness of humans and the independent nature of the spirit. Do we know who we are? Where we came from? Why we are here? Where we are going? These are questions that science, in a sense, can't answer. And so to say these are important questions, though, for human existence, for living a meaningful life. And there are some people who say there is no meaning other than what we make of it. It doesn't seem to be the logic when you say to that person, well, if life has no meaning for you, how about if we take your life away?
Huh.
And at that point, life can be a bit more precious and valuable. So
Well-
human beings exist, only God is, in the fullest sense of the term, is the very being, God whose name is I am who I am, I have being. Humans exist within the time and space that God creates for us as a gift. And as Karl Barth calls it, he says, life between birth and death is the unique opportunity. Yes, you will die. Always remember you will die, but only so you will fully live within the unique opportunity of the lifetime with which you have been gifted. And so we don't want to deny the physicality and the limitation, but we want to celebrate it and live it in a way that values it as we should. Reality lies beyond rational understanding in revelation, in the very nature of who God is and all that God creates. The only proper ground of faith, T.F. Torrance says on page 90, is reality. This is the thing that people, what's that?
Is the reality to which it is correlated as its subjective pole.
Yes. So when people say, "Oh, you're a Christian," I can't handle all of that faith stuff. Faith without evidence is like, well, you have a radically different understanding of faith. Do you believe in science? Well, what do you mean? Well, it says you're making claims about what you think is true of the world based on science. Do you believe it or not? Right? And to say you believe it is to say reality is informing a faith and you believe it because you come to believe it's true. Well, is there a reality in the person of Jesus Christ, the nature of what it means to live in the light of him? And they may say, well, I haven't discovered it. It's like, aha, you haven't discovered it. Go with Polanyi, go with T.F. Torrance into the heuristic adventure of discovery. And don't blind your eyes or close your eyes to what's there. Discover. Become like a child. Ask why. What am I doing here? What does it mean to be fully alive? And again, this is all the opening up of the gospel to say faith opens us then to realize the light of God and the light of the meaning of all that is there. And then we get to respond to reality when we discover that there are ways that are better to live and to love and to learn. And so the nature of the way we act does respond to the nature of the reality that we come to know. And if we're limited in our knowing, if we live in the darkness, keep our eyes blinded from seeing things we don't want to see, the nature of our ability to act will correspondingly be limited because we'll only act within the prison that we live within. You have not been given a spirit of slavery leading to fear again, as though fear is an enslaving way of being, but you've been given the spirit of adoption by whom you cry out, Abba, dear Father, which is the liberation of who we are, no longer enslaved, now liberated to be children, to know who we are, whose we are, what it means to correspond by the Spirit, in knowing who the Father is, and hence who we are as children, to know we are children, and that as children, there is a being loved and loving that is a developmental process within that. All of that is what faith does when we open up to the world of being persons because of the light of faith in the living God. The phrase even, we believe that we may understand. It's easy for people to see that phrase and think that believing is just, I'm going to believe without evidence. Right? Instead of, Jesus said that he was God in the flesh and that he loves you and he's given all for you and he's right here with you today and he still loves you and he just is asking you to trust that his love is true and factual and it'll make a difference. So to say, I believe that, well, tell me more. Okay, I'll take that as a beginning point, that it may be true. Great, that's a good place to start. And to go on from there. But the nature of belief in that phrase, we believe that we may understand, always begins with the actuality of what is there and considering that there is more to investigate. And that is what that we may understand does. Every scientist who chooses what they're going to study, I'm going to study the stars, I'm going to study the ocean. They believe the stars are there and they believe the ocean is there, and therefore they can pursue understanding it. And that is the correlative of, I believe, therefore I understand theologically. In believing, we can then begin to question and to come to understand in a way not previously accessible. Faith is an openness to wisdom requiring commitment. That is the basis of science, he says. Chapter 11, the nature of ultimate reality. The word science, he points out, means to know. Science means to know. It doesn't limit what is known, it's just the human knowing. And science is always the human knowing. Modern science, derived from human observation and research of the objective world, limited science to a chosen aspect within reality, and that is simply the world of objects and not engaging the world of persons. So where do we find absolute reality? Is science classification of facts the way that we're going to get to that? Or is even science a building of faith? And this again is Polanyi, which Torrance is going to build on, is that science has a community of people who believe, who pass on from generation to generation what they found so the next generation can build on that. They have their own specialized language that you have to enter into the community and learn the language and the tools, the methods for further understanding. The nature of the scientific community is no different than the nature of the theological community. It has all the same features to it. All of them are about building faith and bringing people into an understanding to pursue the object of what that faith is about, whether it's objects or the nature of the personal world, i.e., God. So the world is a dynamic field of integrated, interrelated relations. That is the nature of ultimate reality. And so if we can recognize even what you talked about, Paul, with all the ways that, I mean, perverted is one word. We could also say just distracted, or people put values on things that are not, they're not valued by the nature of the gospel, but they, for some reason, find value in controlling other people or looking for ways to escape from reality through amusement. Amusement's always interesting. Amuse, not thinking, ways of not thinking so that you can not engage those things. Those are all just ways of not living within the interrelatedness of relations that bring the fullness of relations. And again, much of this has led to the breakdown of family systems, who each person is out for themselves and has lost touch with what it means to invest in being family. So the nature of ultimate reality is that it's God, it's dynamics, it's God's world that has energy that moves towards wholeness and order, sustained by God. It's complementary. It's prepared for the advent of humanity. What is the influence that wills the coherence and order of all things that exist? That's his final question in the end of that. What is the influence? Which is like McMurray's sense of act is the act of a person. So what is the influence? What is the motivating being that caused all this to happen? So this is moving towards the gospel in chapter 12. Science cannot solve the ultimate mysteries of nature of which we are a part. The human's been made the locus of universe understanding reality. So we alone understand reality and are created to understand it. Objectivity is replaced by subjectivity, but the question, subjectivity receptive or projective? T.F. Torrance is going to go with katafusen. We come to have knowledge according to the nature of reality. So that's receptive. And the nature of projective is what Torrance will call mythology, which the hyphen, my hyphen theology, mythology as my theology, is projecting onto God and the world on what it is that we want to believe. Somebody who says, I'm a scientist of forests, and they come in and they just say, yeah, there's a lot of trees here we can cut down and make a lot from them. It's like, you just sound like a lumberman. Oh no, I'm a scientist. Well, it sounds like you're interested in what you can get out of this forest, not how you can take care of it. Yeah, well, so the question of the agendas that come in, that would be a projective agenda. And so we won't go into all the ways that politics and the media and all that have projective ways of presenting reality and the problem that is there. So what T.F. Torrance and others are talking about is a receptive subjectivity. We come to know and understand God and the world that God creates in such a way that we can be attuned to it, aligned with the God who creates it all, hence the gospel truth. We're aligning with the reality of the personal God. The gospel is an incarnational evidence of reality. God has come, revealed himself, and invited us to live within all that he offers us, with himself, with each other, and the world that he gives to us. Science is the menu that points to a reality. We don't want to throw out science. We just want to say it helps us to talk about, to engage, to learn, to be good children. I think T.F. Torrance says something about a child knows more physics at age 5 than a physicist will learn in all their years of study. And it's just the nature of the learning process of a child to come to learn balance and tensions and all those things. We need science to help us learn about the world. We just don't want it to take the place of actually living in the world. And so if science points to the reality, technology, we've turned into a recipe for how we live within it to serve ourselves. And again, like all things, you can serve yourself. You can use technology for good things too. You can use the internet to have reading groups. And you can use Zoom to get bored and tired and say you hate Zoom, or you can use it to connect with people around the world and say, this is amazing what we can do. We can have people in Ireland and Brazil and other places around the world who meet with us. And that's technology being used in a connective way that I would say it corresponds to the invitation of the gospel to be humans who know and love and search and connect and find joy in discovering the world God creates. God gives himself so that all may be found. That was a nice phrase. This is right towards the end of the book. God gives himself so that all may be found. So rather than theology or a good Christianity being something, believe what I believe or God's going to send you to hell, rather say God has come that we might know God and all that God creates and live with a full sense of enjoyment, of caring for and being cared for the world that we live in, the people that God gifts us to. And so his final point, truth and life are disclosed in Jesus. The gospel is God has come and overcome all of our resistance, confusion, living in the darkness, all of those things. The light of the gospel and the person of Jesus Christ shows us who we are, shows us the ways that we walk away from, get confused about what is reality, so that we might come back into the light that he is and brings to us and the world that we live in. And so science, when properly done, is simply an exploration of God's world and God's self so that we can live in light of the one who makes it and all that God makes. This is the gospel.
Amen.
So there you go. Any thoughts on anything there?
No, that's all very wonderful.
You're
I have a, he says
yeah.
the Christian stands here in a privileged position. He knows that God has not left his fallen world without a witness, but that hymn, that stanza of the hymn he writes, talks about this position. Oh, make but trial of his love, experience will decide how blessed are they, and only they, who in his truth confide. Privileged position for the Christian. And before that, he had just said, the tragic fact is that the Christian community itself is too compromised by the world to make a convincing argument for faith. Bang.
Yeah. Bang.
Ooh. Wow.
Which says we need to be better theologians and better scientists and better in conversation. And I mean, it's part of why I just look for as simple words and illustrations as I can find to help people begin to say, hadn't thought of it that way before. Just to begin to consider, is that process of beginning to believe in order to understand.
And in the spirit of Polanyi, I have to read this sentence.
You can do that.
What the believer can do is to invite science to put this Christian understanding to the heuristic test, which science itself recognizes as essential for establishing the truth of evidence.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes, it is.
Yes. So we
Discover.
just keep coming and asking questions. We need to be childlike enough. We say, I get that, but what about this? What about that? But stay in that inquisitive, curious, delighting in what we find, but looking for more to discover. I mean, that is the life of faith, right?
Yes. Are you aware? I'm sure this is an affirmative answer. The edition by T.F. Torrance's edition of James Clerk Maxwell, A Dynamical Theory of the Electromagnetic Field. That
Yes.
book where he writes a short bio of Maxwell. You probably have that book if
I
you're
have it.
writing
Yeah.
a book. Yeah. I just
I
came
have,
across, he cites that book in this
right.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, Clerk Maxwell gets, I think there's 3 mentions of him maybe in this book. So I mean it's quite
Yeah.
amazing. But yeah, at some point we may try and at least do the prologue to that book or something to try and understand it. It's
Oh,
not an
a
easy
hidden
read,
jewel.
but we can do
Hidden.
that for hidden treasures
Yeah.
at some
That's what I
point.
was thinking. Yeah.
Good. Well, keep those suggestions coming. I try and take all of them seriously, as I hope you can tell. And they're
You
all
do.
great when you do it.
We
So,
appreciate you for doing it too. Thank
Amen.
you.
well, I think this reading group it's great for me, and I think it's great for others just to be in a learning process about really quality material and from each other, and inviting in voices that we wouldn't necessarily maybe hear, and just how much that expands the community and our learning and everything. So it's all good.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Sometimes the
See you next
technology
time.
gets in the way, but blessings on you. Do you know
You
that
too.
You too.
that
Yes.
when Spock did this, do you know what it is?
Yeah, that's Spock, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's Spock got it from somewhere too, though. It's the Hebrew letter Shin, from which the Shalom comes from that.
Ah,
So it was originally a Hebrew blessing. So it's based on a Hebrew blessing
Really?
that he saw and made it into a Trekkie thing. So it has a biblical, in a sense, root to it
wow.
beyond
Wow,
the live long and prosper of Star Trek.
that's a great
Great.
intro to the gospel right there for
It
grandkids,
is. It
for
is.
heathen grandkids. Yeah.
Yep. Goodbye, y'all.
Very good. Take care. Blessings on you.
You too, Marty.